Are you interested in deepening your spiritual awareness and discovering your true nature as divine? Well, you're in the right place. Welcome to Align with the Divine. With me, your host, Patricia Diorio, spiritual mentor, sacred storyteller, and professional intuitive. Join me and my amazing guests each week for a deep dive into the exciting world of spirituality. Align with the Divine will inspire you to embrace your innate power to create your reality. It will motivate you to move past your limited thinking, release your subconscious programming, and show you how to live in the present moment with clarity and focus. Get involved with the show. Send your email to patricia@patriciadiorio.com. This is Align with the Divine. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for being here today. Thanks for those of you who are listening on this podcast and those of you that might be viewing it on YouTube. I'm so excited to be doing this podcast. I sit here in my home in front of my computer, and I've got my water or my tea, and my kitty cats are running back and forth. I mean, is this not the perfect job? And to me, it's never really been a job. It's been an honor to be doing this type of work. And I have the opportunity to interview the most amazing, amazing people. And I had today's guest, you're going to love him. I was at Unity about a month ago, and he was a guest speaker at Unity Spiritual Center in Santa Barbara. And I loved his work. His name is TJ Woodward, and he's a spiritual mentor, teacher. He has written several books. I'm going to share in detail about him in a moment. But what I wanted to tell you was that what impressed me most about him is he talked about this work that he's doing called conscious recovery, as in working with addicts. And he's taken it to a whole different level of transformation, really, because it is transformation. The 12-step program. And I was in a 12-step program for workaholism, Workaholics Anonymous. I was. And, addictions you can be addicted to anything. Addiction is really about not wanting to deal with your feelings and not wanting to get underneath everything that's going on to discover how you can really heal yourself. Well, TJ Woodward has come up with a program for working with addicts that is now reaching across the world. And that is helping people understand that, yes, speaking to the higher power, right? The higher power. But you know what? He helps people understand that the higher power is who they are, that the higher power isn't out there, up there, separate from them, but that the higher power is them. They are an aspect of that divine being. They are an aspect of God. And in that, they're absolutely perfect. So what if they could understand that they are perfect beings having an imperfect human experience, which encompasses all of these problems and belief systems about ourselves that are not true. I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. I'll never amount to anything. Of course, addicts, no matter what their choice is to be addicted to, right, can be a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be drugs. It could be shopping, or it could be sex, or it could be food. We all have them. And if we could truly come to the essence of who we truly are and own our true nature as divine beings having a human experience, then we're really in that process of evolution. Then we're really becoming awake and aware that we can create fabulous lives by making a conscious choice in the moment. So this is right up my alley. I mean, I love everything I'm sharing with you right now. And if you're interested in hearing more about my work, I invite you to my website, alignwiththedivine.net, where all my podcasts will be listed. And just hearing about my work. And if you're interested in having a complimentary tarot reading, just reach out to me. I'd be happy to spend a little bit of time with you and help you maybe understand more deeply about who you are and what you're up to in this lifetime. And so let me share with you about TJ Woodward. He has a wonderful bio. He's a best-selling author, inspirational speaker, revolutionary recovery expert who has helped countless people through his simple yet powerful teachings. And what I said to him today is, I said, in preparation for this interview, I said, you're really helping people understand that they are the higher power, that the higher power isn't out there, up there, separate from them, that they are the higher power. Well, I am so delighted today to introduce my guest, Mr. TJ Woodward. I had the honor of hearing him speak twice now at Unity here in Santa Barbara, and I was so impressed both times that I could not have him on the show, Align with Divine. So welcome everyone to the show. And TJ has an incredibly beautiful bio, which I went over in the introduction, and we're going to be digging into some of that here pretty soon. But I want to start with a question, TJ, and thank you so much for being here, that touched me so deeply when I heard you speak last. You said we are spiritual beings having a spiritual experience. And even as I say it now, I get rushes in my body because I go, oh, gosh, I've been the queen of we're spiritual beings having a human experience for like 27 years. And actually, when you think about it, it's really about having a spiritual experience. Before I get into my understanding of that, I'd love you to share what you mean by that.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm so honored to be here with you. I love that we're going to be playing in this field of infinite possibilities together. For me, I love the way you said it, because you said, I've been the queen of this for all these years, and now there's this new level that we're moving into. And that really is a question for me. What if everything is spiritual? So what do I mean by that? When we hear I'm a spiritual being having a human experience, that is certainly a huge step from what preceded it, which is we're human beings. And maybe we're human beings having a spiritual experience. I woke up one day and it was like there was some sort of upload in my dream or in my sleep. What if it's all spiritual? What if there isn't certain parts of life that are human and certain parts that are spiritual? And for me, what happened is there was an energetic shift in the sense of duality. And so I became really aware then when a lot of times in spiritual circles, we'll talk about the ego and getting rid of the ego. We'll talk about positive and negative emotions. And I realized, wow, we're moving into a place of integrating all of that, where all of it is spiritual. It doesn't mean it all feels so great, right? The dark night of the soul is part of the spiritual experience, but it's not to be rejected as just, oh, that's just me being human. So that's really kind of an overview of what I mean by that. And when I say I mean it, it was really something I received that I'm sure a lot of us are on the precipice of. And then now we're saying, oh yeah, we're moving into this new era.
I think those of us that are in this conversation about being divine beings having a human experience, we get it. It sounds like, well, that makes sense, right? We're spirit in the body. Quantum physics talks about everything being energy, and we're energy beings having a human experience. And I've taught this for all the years that I've been doing my circles and my one-on-ones, and people seem to get it. But there are those that don't really get it because they lapse back into their old behavior patterns where they're not observing their thoughts and making another choice, where they're not catching themselves going down that rabbit hole of some belief system, imprint, and program from the past that's still controlling them and affecting their lives. So I agree with you. The body of work I work with is the word work with Paul Selig. Are you familiar with I Am the Word, that channel text? Yeah. And the guides say we cannot not be God. We cannot not be who we are. It's impossible because it's the truth of who we are. That is a huge step for people to actually get it. And I think that this idea that it's still an intellectual conversation, keeps them stuck perhaps in these old patterns. But actually, I look at it in how do I address my daily life in a spiritual way? Right? Do I have to meditate, or do I have to do this, do that, the other thing? I mean, there are a lot of tools and a lot of things that we do to come into alignment. But I think the most important thing is to be aligned spiritually. And this is really what you're up to in your wonderful work with recovery, is helping people to get aligned with their true nature. And instead of having the higher power be up there, out there somewhere, it's about really, correct me if I'm wrong, it's bringing it right home to, oh my, you mean I am the higher power that I've been speaking to and praying
Oh,
to all this time? Yeah.
I
So
love that. I am the higher power I've been searching for. Gosh, that's beautiful. That is so incredible because that is true in a lot of recovery circles. And, you and I have been in spiritual circles and new thought circles. And the idea for me, when I walked into my first unity community, which was either 88 or 89, it's a little blurry, but the idea that it's all God or all source or all love, and that I'm a spark of that was something that was profound to me. And yet at the same time, it was like coming home to what I instinctively knew. It wasn't like, oh, here's this big foreign concept. It's like, finally someone else is saying this, right? So when we look at recovery circles, there has been traditionally, so sort of, if you look at the traditional models, it's there's something wrong with you, you're broken, you're selfish, you're self-centered, you have this disease of addiction, and you need to surrender that to a higher power. And I think that was an important part of our evolution, just like a lot of religion and other spiritual practices have been part of the evolution. And now we're saying, what if I'm actually whole and perfect? What if I'm a spark of divinity? How would that change the conversation about healing my trauma, my disconnection, and my shame, right? How would that change the conversation about how we view ourselves, the world, and our addiction?
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I've really come to accept that everything is God. Everything is spirit. There's nothing that's not. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And in my work, the guides talk about lifting up the Putins and the
Yeah.
Trumps
Yeah.
and the bad guys and the child molesters and the human trafficking, all this stuff that's going on that is so tragic, certainly on a mundane level, on a human level. But evolution is happening and people are waking up. They're waking up to who they are and that power. And the thing is, the question I would ask you is how do we get from the concept of being divine to the knowing of being divine? That's what my work is. I want to help people move there. And you too, because, well, then before we get into that, why don't you share a little bit about the recovery program, the conscious recovery program, because that's how I first was introduced to you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Conscious recovery was born out of my own experience. I myself had struggled, I guess I'll use the word struggled with addiction in my teen years, got sober, got into recovery right before I turned 21. And found myself on this journey that started with an outer search, right? This outer search for higher power, this outer search for meaning, this outer search for connection. And something happened for me, which was all of that quit working in a really powerful way. And I was left to sort of meet myself and all of the edges that were sharp edges, dark edges, all the different words we can use. But I met a woman, Mary Helen Brownell. I always talk about her because she's just this beautiful, radiant being who took me on a very different journey. And that was about rediscovering my true essence. I started working in the addiction treatment field in 2008. And I realized so much of the paradigm as it has been established was what's wrong with you and how do we fix you, right? And I knew that was happening in recovery circles, but to come into a professional setting and really see how much was about diagnosing and treating and watching people come back over and over and over again and hearing well-meaning clinicians, counselors, coaches, therapists talk about their clients as if they were broken or damaged, and having all the experience I had with my own reconnecting with my true nature, my own spiritual journey, which we could talk more about. But I said, I want to ask a different question. And that question is, what if this person, whoever this person is I'm sitting in front of, who is at a time in their life where they're addicted, what if they're whole and perfect underneath all of that? And what if the way I witness or observe them, because you and I know, and quantum mechanics is now measuring what we've known for many, many years, and that is the observer has a profound effect. So if I'm looking at you as broken, what does that create? So conscious recovery was born out of that, really, as I saw not only my own experience toward freedom that I had discovered, but also this need to look at the paradigm as it's established and ask some different questions.
I mean, that is a 180-degree shift there. I mean, that is the total opposite way of looking at people. And I I had my, my dark night as a child. I was molested, and it's just a story that I've worked through, But the thing is that I truly believed that, I was bad and that I would die and go to hell and burn forever, and that God would never love me again. I was a little girl. I was 6 years old. I mean, where does a child go with that, right?
Yeah.
And those belief systems haunted me. And I wrote a speech called uh, I'm a perfectionist in recovery. So I went into that whole thing about wanting to be perfect, and I had to be perfect, and I had to get straight A's, and I had to be a good girl. I wore this mask of Patricia Diorio, of who I thought people wanted to see. So I had kind of like acted. I mean, it was me, and I had all these talents and skills, and I looked the way I looked, but I believed that I wasn't good enough. So I was in chronic grade depression and struggling always to be perfect. But of course, the interesting thing is that we are perfect. We're perfect beings having an imperfect human experience, and there's nothing that's perfect in the world.
Yeah, and what you're talking about is so central to my work, both conscious recovery. We'll just stay there. So what happens is we develop, as you're talking about, through experiences that we would consider to be traumatic, right? So in my case, I also had sexual trauma, and it doesn't make sense intellectually as an adult. I know a child did not do something wrong, but for some reason the child mind will often believe they're bad or they're wrong. They'll absorb actually the shame from the perpetrator or the person doing it. So our minds when we're really young aren't really nuanced yet. So it's very much in good, bad, right, wrong, dual, this dual thinking. So if one of my parents is upset, I must have done something wrong. If one of my parents is happy, I must be a good child, right? So if we look at something like sexual trauma, even though we understand as adults that happened to us, that wasn't something that we did or were bad, we actually buried it very deeply in our unconscious, what I call core false beliefs. Now, a lot of people talk about core beliefs. That's not new. I add the word false because I want to acknowledge that it's a lie that we've picked up. But you and I both know it's not just a thought, it's a frequency, right?
Yeah.
And so we walk around the world with this frequency. And then in conscious recovery, I say, then from that core false belief, we create a brilliant strategy. And it's interesting, in my book, Conscious Creation, I actually write about someone who had a very similar experience that you did. She became a perfectionist, a high achiever. And what was driving that unconsciously is I'm not worthy. So I need to prove to the world that I am. And the issue is it gets great results for a while, right? And then we get stuck there sometimes, even though, as you said so eloquently, even though I was achieving, it still wasn't healing this sense of unworthiness. Even though I was working really hard, achieving in the outer realm, I had this low grade depression. And so that's where we are invited to take a look at how we actually start to heal this, because it's not an intellectual process only. And a lot of new thought and a lot of therapeutic models center in the mind, which is really useful. And what we're talking about is, in addition to that, when I spoke at Unity, I think I said I walked into Unity and they said thoughts create reality. And that sounded great, but how the heck do I change them, right? So we're talking about healing from a much deeper place so that we can start to change that frequency.
Well, that's why, I have in a way the audacity to say that there is really one thing, in my opinion, there is one thing that if every human being knew this thing, that everything would change. We would have heaven on earth. And that one thing is that we are divine. We are God. Because if we know it, I make the distinction of, for many, many years, it was a great conversation. I love to have a conversation about the fact that we're God, but I believed it and I talked about it a lot. And I thought it was interesting. But this last 8 years with this body of work that I've been doing, I have moved from the belief, which is from the intellect, to the knowing, which is in the heart and in every cell of my body. I know it. So when I get depressed and bummed out and shit happens in my life,
Yep.
There's a part of me that wants to go right down that rabbit hole of wow, 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 but I don't. And then I say, oh, wait a minute. Remember, Patricia, you're divine. You're God in the body. You're perfect. So how can I change it? Choose again. Make another choose again from the Course in Miracles. That's one of the things I learned from the Course in Miracles. Make another choice. And people don't I would imagine you see it a lot in recovery is people don't think they have the power to do something as simple as choose again.
That's right. And unfortunately, they get taught that. It gets reconfirmed, right? When we say to someone you have a chronic lifelong illness that can never be healed, right? That we call alcoholism. I understand why we do that, and I understand how on some levels of consciousness that can be true. What we're saying is, in addition to that, what if we actually do have the power to change? What if we actually do have the power to heal? And like you, what happened for me was it moved from an intellectual understanding to an embodied experience. And I would love to tell you, Patricia, and I know that I'm going to guess because here we are, kindred spirits. We even matched today wearing our outfits unplanned. That I would love to say that embodiment, that moving from the head into the embodiment was this beautiful, blissful experience. Sometimes it was, but it was also excruciatingly painful for me because in New Thought, we call it chemicalization. And that is when a divine idea becomes embodied that's much deeper than our mind, then things get shaken up in relative reality. In other words, our life can fall apart. Everything I've ever believed no longer becomes true. And that's extremely disorienting. I remember for a period of time, I would say, if you're feeling disoriented, congratulations, because you're reorienting yourself to a completely different way of seeing. So this embodying of it is much different than the thought of it. And I think a lot of us have an intellectual understanding of spiritual principles. A lot of people have intellectual understanding of recovery principles. We're talking about something much deeper here, and that is that thing that you said that is so powerful. If each one of us knew this, the whole world would change instantly.
Really?
Instantly.
Because we would know that what we had bought into about unworthy and not good enough and blah, 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 I'm not this, I'm not that, or I am this, or I am that, that would keep me from being successful, are not true. They're lies that we bought into. And the tragedy of this happening to children under the age of 7, Bruce Lipton says, we're in a theta state of consciousness from 6 months in utero until 7, and even we go on into latency, also spending a lot of time in theta. And he said thoughts go in like into the subconscious. The subconscious is a psychic sponge. It just sucks these belief systems into the subconscious, good, bad, and indifferent. It doesn't evaluate anything. It just takes it.
That's
and
right.
Then we get plugged into, and it took me 37 years, 30 years after I was molested, I discovered what happened to me, which is a very interesting story. But after that, after I actually discovered what happened to me, and I was into the whole spiritual conversation, I went, wait a minute, I can make another choice here.
Yeah.
I can make another choice here. This is not true about me. This is a lie about me. And, this speaks to the conditioning we have. I mean, not everybody's plugged into structured religion. I was Catholicism. But other people have other societal situations and family situations and that really mess them up subconsciously. Share about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is really
what is the role? I want to take your first question here. What is the role of the unconscious in the creation process?
Well, that's it. What we're talking about. I love the way you said it. You articulated it so beautifully. We are like a sponge. At one point, I'm not a computer guy, but it was like we're programmed, and then the computer is programmed, like the software is there. And then from then on, we're a projector. We're no longer absorbing, we're projecting, right? And so let me be clear what I mean. What you said is we start absorbing the energy around us, because it really is energy. It's not a thought, because our 6-year-old, our 5-year-old, our 4-year-old, our brains aren't even developed enough to understand. So we're absorbing energy, really. My parents, I love both of my parents. They were in a loveless marriage. I learned recently just how much that was true, and I absorbed that, right? It wasn't that they were bad parents. It's they were in this kind of interesting contract. It was very, very Leave It to Beaver kind of moment where everyone was pretending everything was okay, but I could clearly feel there wasn't love there. Like I said, I had sexual trauma. I had listening, we were talking about the programs, thinking about, depending on your age, but certainly was true for me, the programs I heard about race, gender, orientation, politics, all of it, I absorbed all of this. deeply concretized into my unconscious became a few core things. I'm not lovable. I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. From that moment on, that was buried, right? It was no longer even conscious for me. But at that moment, that was the core decision. And then I saw it everywhere. We call it confirmation bias now. I
Yeah.
decide that that's what I'm going to see, and I see it everywhere, right? So I had a very interesting combination. I had a core belief that everyone was going to like me, but no one could love me. Very interesting
Oh,
experience throughout my 20s. So the role of the unconscious is really powerful, and it runs the show until we realize that it's there. And I like to say something that's pretty provocative, and that is we can actually change the past. Let
yeah.
me be clear. We're not trying to pretend like something didn't happen because, you and I know, and maybe we've both even done it. We've done the spiritual bypass where we say, oh, that never hurt me. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we had these core decisions we made about ourselves. It was less about what happened and more about what we decided about what happened.
That's right.
We can go back and change that core decision and therefore in some way change the past. We're not pretending like something didn't happen. I'm going to say that a few times because sometimes people think that's what I'm saying. Let's pretend it didn't happen. Sometimes we have to go back and feel the pain. But ultimately it's about having a different decision from that younger self and then realizing that we can actually change the entire matrix, if you will, of what we once called reality and realize that we are causing or creating what we call reality.
Right. Whether we know it or not, or like it or not, we're creating our reality. And if we don't know it, then we go right down that victim road, to thinking that life is happening to me instead of for me.
Right.
Which brings me to another thing that is very provocative.
Yes.
People will say, how did you create the reality of being molested? A child doesn't choose that. But I think that, and this is where I've come, and maybe you can help me get clear on it. I think our souls come into this lifetime, this experience, this body with lessons to learn, with a purpose. And we need to have certain experiences. The nuns told us that if we committed a mortal sin, God would never love us again. And that was, yes, you would burn in hell forever, but the true suffering is that God will never love you again. And I was 6. And that was drummed into me by the nuns. So on a subconscious level, I was driven to find God. So in a way, it was really the catalyst to my spiritual work. Yeah. Because I have found God and I'm looking at it.
Isn't that interesting?
What is not, that there's nothing that's not. So what do you say about that when people say, how can you say you're fully responsible for creating your reality if you're a child and you're truly a victim? I'm going to put parentheses around that word victim of circumstances.
So there's 2 different ways to talk about it. One avenue, I think, is to say something that's very simple, and that is we're not saying that we're to blame for what happened to us. But what happens is we get programmed because of those experiences, and then from then on, we are creating our reality. So it's kind of this interesting, nuanced conversation, right? When we're really young, like we said, we're sponges, right? So we're not responsible. And again, we're going to talk about it in 2 ways. So on one hand, or on one level, we're not responsible for what happened to us. So one way to say it is I'm not responsible for what happened to me, but I am responsible for what I do with it. But there is this deeper spiritual truth, and that is the possibility that we chose to be here and have certain experiences.
Yes.
I don't have the answer for that. I'm not claiming to say I know that's what happened. It certainly rings true for me because I remember being a little kid and thinking, wow, isn't it interesting I chose to be on this planet right now? Because I remember my grandfather, who I really loved, saying racist things. The men in my life saying excruciatingly derogatory things around women, objectifying them. The homophobia that I experienced being a little gay boy in Indiana in the 1970s. So all the different layers of that, I remember thinking, gosh, it's so interesting that I chose to be here. Now, that might be true. It might be that our soul chooses, but it's not conscious. It might be totally random that we came here. I think the valuable question is, now what? Now or who have we come here to be? Because I had an innate awareness that some of us had chosen to that we've chosen to be here during this time to bring light into the world. And, that's the fundamental teaching of Jesus. I mean, there's no
Yeah.
greater, I am the light of the world. That is who we are.
Except that he came here to tell us we all were, except that
That's right.
we didn't get it at the time. Well, the guides from I Am the Word. If you haven't read the book, I highly encourage you to do it. It'll just complement everything that we're talking about. And they say that our soul comes into each lifetime to learn. Our soul is here to learn. Our Christed self, which is really what they're about doing, helping us come into our, what they call the Christed self, the true self. You can call it anything you want, but it's that God, that aspect of God that we are, the spark and the spark, the cell in the body of God. Metaphorically, we can look at it a lot in any way, but that aspect of us is just here to be, just to be vibrating at that high frequency. When we're vibrating at a high frequency based on what we're thinking, feeling, and speaking, then our world is in a different way. I mean, we're vibrating over here. We're not going to attract the crap down here that, perhaps we would have if we were a glass half empty kind of person. So I look at it and I go, okay, so I have recently in my life, I had quite a few challenges that have really pushed me up against my stuff, like, okay, here's my next level of really getting it.
Yeah.
But I'm dealing with it differently. I'm dealing with it differently because I know something that I didn't know 5 years ago or more than that. I know that I am an aspect of God. And I use the word God. And when I speak, I do a lot of different summits that I'm on. And I actually say, okay, so I'm going to say a word now that's probably going to shock you. But you know what? We are God. We are God. We cannot not be what we are. And I said, I use that word because it's become such a charged word because of all the structured religion that we've had to contend with in this world, from the beginning, that, we don't want to use the word. So unknowable, unnameable, ineffable, universe, source, force, Uncle Charlie, who cares what we call it? I think people know when we say that, what we're talking about. So how do you deliver this to the people that you're counseling in recovery?
Well, I think it's interesting because what you just said is so true, right? Because we come to life experiences through our level of consciousness or our level of awareness. Life continues to happen, but we come at it. For a while, I was really into spiral dynamics, which shows us the evolution of consciousness and how life is like a spiral, and we're spiraling. We come to go through the same situations, but from a higher level of awareness, and therefore experience it differently. And that's where I say we kind of can then kind of change the past because it only exists in our mind, right? So if we're taking that model and looking at the recovery community, or someone, let's say someone who is new to recovery or just coming out of an addiction, when they hear the words underneath all addictive behavior is an essential self that's whole and perfect, what I see is this: they light up because there's a knowing that's way beyond the mind. Because, sometimes people want to debate that. Well, there's no way I'm whole. They're in the mind. I big part of my work is I go in and I train clinicians at treatment programs throughout the country on this model, asking that what if question. What gets created when I look at my clients as broken? And what if I were to look at them as whole and perfect? Sometimes they debate that. Well, there's no way they're whole and perfect, and clients aren't going to believe that. But I witness people lighting up because it's an innate knowing. It's not in the mind. Yeah.
Exactly. It's an innate knowing. We know it. But people don't really have that conversation, or that question is really not asked of them, or that statement that, what if despite everything that you've gone through, behind all of that and all of those traumas and negativity, you're a whole perfect being that's chosen to come here and have these human experiences. And, by observing yourself in that relationship, being human, you can make another choice.
Yeah.
And then it comes back to vibration and frequency. We'll talk about that in a moment, but go ahead.
Well, that's right. And I recently had dinner with someone who's a well-known person in the field of psychiatry and psychology. And he said, I love what you're saying, but I don't know if those guys at Harvard are ready to hear it yet. Right. And so what I say is, oh, yeah, they are. Oh, yeah, they are. Because we're 15 years ago, when I started working in this field, the conversation that you and I are having wasn't so well received in my circles. They were like, what is that woo-woo stuff you're talking about? Now, they're very much accepting it. Oh my gosh, we're learning through neuroplasticity of the brain that what we think and what we do changes the chemistry of the brain. We're looking at epigenetics now, where we're starting to realize that we can change the way we relate to our DNA. This is powerful, right? So in other words, science is starting to measure what we've been talking about for decades, right? So I am holding that the next 10 or 15 years, this is going to become a more mainstream conversation. And I'm going to say this, it may sound a little snarky, but I'm not trying to be snarky. We'll let the scientists measure it so they can say, oh, look, it's true. But you and I both know, and quantum mechanics is showing us that what we expect to see, we will see. So if I say, you're a whole and perfect spiritual being, or you're a whole and perfect being, you came into the world as a spark of divinity and you forgot that truth. So of course you had, these experiences that caused you to separate from that. And then you had all sorts of different, what I call brilliant strategies that might be cocaine, that might be perfectionism, it might be shopping, it might be all sorts of different things because we felt broken. And so it comes down to something so simple. When I know who and what I am, I radiate that into the world.
Yes.
When I believe I am broken or damaged, I act broken and damaged.
Right.
I've caused a lot of harm to myself and others, and I discovered something so simple. Every single time, it was because I was living from the core false belief instead of living from my divinity 100% of the time. That's all I need to measure. So when we're looking at people with addiction or someone coming to a spiritual community or to therapy or to coaching, they're coming where they might be feeling really broken. And my job is to hold a higher possibility for them.
Right.
Because that experiment, we know what happens. We know the truth. Remarkable transformation.
Yes. Yes. And when you work with these clients, what you're doing vibrationally is you're holding the frequency of who they truly are. So you're seeing them as God in the body, having this awful experience about this, that, or the other thing, whatever is up for them in their lives. But when you vibrate at that frequency yourself as their guide, as their therapist, so to speak, you are already contributing to them energetically, then giving them permission in a way, the space to actually wait a minute. And then when you say that you're a spark of the divine or a cell in the body of God or you're God, I totally agree with you, TJ. They get it.
Yeah.
In every cell of their body, they get it because it's a memory that's been stirred. It's like, oh, and then the more they start to think about it, then it will move them. So tell me about your experiences with clients. Have you seen clients? Maybe this is a rhetorical question. Have you seen clients that have actually embraced the knowing of who they are and made the kind of changes that they could make in their lives?
Oh, absolutely. And so the progression of my work, if you will, I don't work directly with clients very often anymore. I now, because I had this spark of divinity about in 2018, can I now start to facilitate change within the entire field of behavioral health? Can I train, in other words, can I train others to do this? And I'm not in any way arrogant enough to say that I'm the only one doing it, but can we come together, those of us who know this, who know the impact and the power of how we behold someone, can we come together and start to really embrace this as a field? And so the short answer is absolutely. I've seen remarkable healing. When we talk about someone reconnecting with their true nature, sometimes there can be an instantaneous shift where they realize, oh my gosh, because you said this, not in these exact words, I have this trauma, but it's not who I am. if that moment happens, or when that moment happens, that is a fundamental, that is a profoundly different starting point to, oh my gosh, I'm broken because I have all this trauma, and I need to learn how to heal it or fix it. It's a very different starting point. Doesn't mean that someone has that moment that they know who and what they are and instantaneously their whole life gets healed. It's possible.
It's
And for
possible.
many of us, it's part of it as a process, but that is the starting point, is a really different place to start than, okay, what's wrong with you? What's broken about you? And how do I give you tools to manage that? We hear these things all the time, to cope with that. No, we're saying something really different. Let's start with reconnecting with who you really are. And as you said, it's a cellular memory, right? So it's not me teaching them, because I don't have to teach them. They know that.
Right, right. Exactly. Something else I wanted to talk to you about too that I think is very important. You said it's possible to change the past. Yes, it is. It's possible to change the past. And where I think we're headed evolutionarily is realizing that the past, like Course in Miracles says, the past is gone except for its beauty, and all that remains is a blessing. Joe Dispenza says, memory without the emotional charge is called wisdom. Memory without the emotional charge is called wisdom. So there's and they're true. But what I feel now, and again, going back to the word work, leaving the past, letting go of history, definition, and collective agreement, because it's not who we are now. When we let go of our history, we let go of our definition of how we've defined ourselves, how we've allowed family and friends and community to define us. And of course, collective agreement. Oh my God, we can talk forever on collective agreement, because we get sucked into that resonant field of people thinking that if you're a certain age, then you have to have this disease or that disease or whatever, all the conditioning of society.
Yeah.
So how do you see really leaving the past in the past and helping people understand that they are simply not their past, their definition, or collective agreement, that they got sucked into it?
I think it's a twofold process, whether we're in therapy, a spiritual community, recovery, all the different ways we choose consciously or unconsciously to have these experiences to bring us home, right? So for some, it might be an addiction. For others, it might be, finding themselves in relationships that are unfulfilling. The list can go on and on, but we have this moment where we reach this twofold process, and it's one, acknowledging who and what we really are. And you and I have talked about this a lot, right? So it's like mindfulness, meditation, spending time in the silence, reconnecting with that energy field. It's not really reconnecting, it's reminding myself that's who I am. It feels like I'm reconnecting because I feel like I separated, but I didn't really. The second part of it is pretty much unlearning everything we've ever been taught that's counter to that. And that means questioning everything. It doesn't mean, because, I spent 2 decades, I would say 2 decades, from 20 to 40, kind of having a brutal relationship with the inner dialogue. Like, you shouldn't think that. Don't think that. The cosmic 2x4 is about to get you. Cancel, all of that. And then I realized that, like, there's a place where I can start to observe those thoughts. And then I realized, as you say so eloquently, let's say there's 10,000 thoughts right now, and I choose which one I'm going to focus on. I don't have to get rid of my past. I don't have to get rid of what we call negative thinking. I realize that I can observe that and then start to question it. Where did I get that idea? I think about the programs of my family. How many times did I hear my mother say, money doesn't grow on trees? And back then I'm like, it actually does. It's paper. It literally grows on trees. Now we don't really have paper money, but back then, and I'm like, so I absorbed that, right? Midwest, you have to work hard. The harder you work, the better human you are. Stay humble. All these messages, right? Unlearning all of those, which comes through questioning for me. Where did I first learn that? What does it feel like in my body when I believe it? What might it feel like if I weren't to buy into that? What would this thought feel like? I love that. What would attaching to this thought feel like? I am abundant and infinite. Wow, that feels so much lighter. And then we start to be in the frequency, because we said we were going to talk about it. I spent a lot of time thinking, I shouldn't be in this negative energy. That's, because that was at least a decade. I shouldn't be so negative. Stop being so negative. Then I realized, Let me choose this and see how it feels, even if it's for 30 seconds. I am infinite. Oh, that feels really light. Let me stay in that for a little while and see what happens.
Yeah, it really comes down to knowing who we are and owning our power to create our reality. I've dealt with clients that have been suffering with uh, serious illnesses, and when I work with them within the word work, the guides say that we're not healing the cells.
Mm.
We're not actually healing the cells. What we're actually doing is transforming the cells, transforming them. So it's not about fixing something that's broken. It's about transforming them to a whole new, way of feeling and being in the world. And I think that's an important distinction too, because people talk about healing so much, but it's really about transformation.
Yeah.
It's really about transformation.
It's interesting because one of the things that I have said is I want to see us in the addiction treatment world not use the word treatment centers, but to use the term healing centers. And I know that's actually just a step, because that's an important step. And then after that, we could call them transformation centers or wellness centers or wholeness centers, right? Like all of that, which is where we're headed, but sometimes there's a bridge, right? So I remember when I was new in my ministerial studies, for example, we did a Wednesday evening service at our community, and someone said, well, if you want to attract a bunch of people who feel broken, call it a healing circle and see what happens. And it was true, because people wanted that healing because they felt so broken. And again, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that, but we want to ask what it creates and what's a greater possibility. And so I love what you're saying, because you're asking the question, what if I view this as transformation? What might that create? It's a very different energy.
I even that word, when you said the word transformation, I feel this rush, these goosebumps that go up my spine, because, I feel that, and I heard Bruce Lipton say this when COVID first hit, and I feel the same way. He said, I want to celebrate this. I want to celebrate what's happening right now. We've been waiting for this paradigm shift for a long time. In 1996, I started a show called The Paradigm Shift. And it was, and what I meant was the mother of all paradigm shifts, which is waking up to the truth that we're not human beings having an occasional spiritual thought, but that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. I mean, that is the mother of all paradigm shifts when you think about it. I mean, that's really acknowledging our divinity. And I think that here, almost 26 years later, the paradigm is shifting. It's happening. And where the world is right now it's like humanity is the caterpillar that has gluttonously devoured all the milkweed leaves and has retreated to the chrysalis, where it's in breakdown, because we're in breakdown. When you look at what's going on in the world, we're in breakdown into this elixir, this mushy elixir that results what? At the right time.
Yeah.
In the monarch butterfly. So I think humanity is moving through its process of breakdown and will eventually result in the monarch butterfly. And maybe that's, my mother used to call me a Pollyanna, because I would hold that, that the highest possible outcome for situations. But I do think that this is happening now, TJ. I think humanity is awakening. We're on that evolutionary spiral and we're waking up, and people are getting it. And I don't know if I'll see heaven on earth in my lifetime. You probably will, but I'm doing everything I can to really live that myself. So I create heaven on earth in my own life, because we certainly can do that. I mean, heaven is not up there and hell is not right here. Heaven and hell are here, depending on what we're thinking.
Right. States of consciousness. And I'm going to say some things that might be slightly provocative. I think we often say things like we're in a really dark time. There's a lot of divisiveness. But it's always been happening on planet Earth. If anything, we're in a better time than we've ever been in. Right. We're not, murdering people in the town square. We're still murdering people in the name of justice. We are not The KKK isn't active as much as it once was. You can look at all these things. And the reason I say it's provocative is people will say, well, how dare you? There's all these things. Look at all these horrible things happening. But let's look back throughout history, right? We're actually at a better time. And we're at a better time because the evolution of consciousness is happening. And it's anything unlike, that's like when I talked about chemicalization, you and I and a lot of people, not a handful, but massive groups of people now understand a greater reality. And if you look at the young people, they come in with it.
Yeah.
They come in with a higher level of consciousness because those of us who came before did the work in consciousness so that they can come in at a higher level. It's happening.
It is
right?
happening.
It's happening in a profound way. And heaven and hell are states of consciousness. So do I hold that planet Earth at one point will be an actual experience of heaven? Yeah, because it's happening right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And by the way, so is hell.
And so is hell. Yeah.
Now, what we want to be careful of in this conversation, because I know at least one person is watching or will watch and will say, are you pretending like these horrific things aren't happening? No.
No.
If anything, what I'm saying is, yes, it's happening. And now I have a choice in how I view it. And how I view it is what concretizes it one direction or the other. This is what quantum mechanics is showing us in the quantum field. So if I call something horrible, there's more horrible. And so I did a talk some years back called Spiritual Activism. Activism traditionally has been, what am I against and what am I fighting? And now what do we stand for, not what do we stand against? And we have, people like Martin Luther King and Mother Teresa who have been saying this for a long time. Stand for, not against. When I'm looking at activism, because a lot of times activism is, oh, these poor people, I need to help them. I'm already setting up an imbalance, right? No, these are infinite beings that right now I'm here to support in them knowing that. And that's sort of that same paradigm with addiction. And if this sounds esoteric, it's actually quite practical. Very practical.
It's very practical. It's very practical. Well, humanity is evolving. People are waking up, and I would say that, I don't know, maybe this is a bit of a discouragement, but I want to be realistic. Just like you have the capstone of all the wealth and power in the world. You've got, the wealthy 1% representing the capstone of humanity, and then everybody else, I think there is a spiritually conscious, aligned, knowing that they're God 1%.
Yeah.
And I think that's our work. That is our work to really bring it, into all the levels of consciousness in humanity, because it's inevitably going to happen. We know that it's going to happen, right? And then we know that we're a part of making that happen. How long it's going to take, I don't know, but I think certainly we can expedite it with the work that we're doing. You're doing amazing work.
Thank you. And look at how much it's changed in our lifetime.
Yeah.
I mean, it really has, right? I think about sort of a non sequitur, but I was watching this documentary about Norman Lear and all that he contributed through comedy and through television of bringing these conversations, like the Archie Bunker character, right? In All in the Family. I mean, first of all, we couldn't even make TV like that anymore because it's just way too controversial. But he was pointing to, and he was interviewed and he said something that I thought was so powerful. He said, my intention with that character wasn't for people, and this is a paraphrase, by the way, you can watch the documentary. He might not, this is what I heard him say. It wasn't that this was a bad person. It was so that someone might say, oh my gosh, it's horrible what he's saying, but I've said something similar to that. Right. And so not to be against him or how bad or awful he is, but to actually recognize I've contributed to this. Right. And that's really what we're looking at in consciousness. I think, we hear the drumbeat of we're a polarized country. We keep hearing it. And I actually don't think that's true. I think we are conditioned to have polarized thinking. In other words, we've been so deeply conditioned to look at the world through us and them and good and bad that we find our tribe, and that can be useful, but can also be detrimental into ushering in us into the next level of consciousness, which is oneness. It doesn't mean we don't celebrate the seeming differences in the human incarnation, because that's the way Michael Beckwith says it. He says we're spiritual beings having a human incarnation. That means we're incarnating as spirit onto planet Earth to be that.
I like that. Spiritual beings having a spiritual incarnation.
Having a physical incarnation.
A physical incarnation. That's interesting too. I can do a whole talk just on those three ways of looking at who we are. Spiritual being having a human experience, spiritual being having a spiritual experience, spiritual being having a human incarnation.
And don't forget, a spiritual being having a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
That's where we're headed, right? And
that's where we're headed.
And there's always pioneers and all of us are pioneers if we choose it, right? It's not for that. The way I say it is what used to be for the chosen few that we've heard about, like Buddha, Jesus, Lao Tzu. Of course, they've all been men. That's a whole other conversation, which isn't true, but those are the ones that get the credit. But it used to be for a select few, and now more and more of us. You talked about the 1%. And I think it's 2% and it's 3% and it's 4%. And then the tipping point where people are being taught differently, because we heal trauma for generations back when we say, no, I'm not passing this along. I'm not going to abuse a person the way that my uncles abused me. I'm not going to do it. Right. And I'm going to do the work that is required for me to acknowledge what wholeness lives within me and what the programs have been that have allowed me to become that person, but been able to do enough healing or wholeness work or transformation to realize that's not who I am. Then we break that cycle, and we break that cycle one moment at a time, and we do it in groups. That's why I don't ascribe to that. Let's find a group of like-minded people. I want to say like-hearted or like committed to the vision of being that 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%. I don't have to agree with you to be your kindred spirit.
Right.
No matter who it is, if we talk long enough, we would find a place to disagree. So
you don't have to agree, because it's a done deal, whether we connect or not. The whole thing is, for me, given all the negative stuff that's been going on, the war in Ukraine, which is heartbreaking for sure. And I just saw this amazing film. You probably heard about it. The Power of Freedom. Have you heard of it? Mm-hmm. It's a docudrama about the human trafficking. It's just phenomenal. I highly, highly recommend it. Yeah. In fact, what they're doing is asking people who see the film to recommend it to other people, because a portion of the tickets go to this globally, and people all over the world are watching this film. I have a client in South Africa, and I said, I have to tell you about this film I saw. You have to see it. And she goes, oh my God, you're the third person to have told me that. And she's in South Africa.
Amazing.
So it really boils down to judgment. If I judge Ukraine and Putin and all the bad guys, if I judge them, if I look at our politics and judge the politicians, then what I'm doing is I'm vibrating at the same frequency and I'm reinforcing it. Okay. But instead, if I lift them up just simply by acknowledging them as divine, and I'm changing the energy and the frequency. And we all have our spiritual colleagues that are close friends and stuff. And, many of them are totally into this whole conspiracy the whole conspiracy theory. And I'm not saying it's not valid. I have my own issues about vaccinations and all of this stuff that's going on. All of it. I mean, I think actually that it's, valid. But I tell them, I'm not going down there with you, girls. It's just not going to happen. Because I go down there with you, I'm contributing to the problem, not to the solution.
Well, and there are certain political figures who understand, even though some people say this person isn't smart, understand how to manipulate consciousness in a very powerful way. And that is, let me get people really angry at me and I will rise to power. And it just keeps working. And he's like, look over there. And everyone looks over there. It's unbelievable to me that if we would stop the fight that person would have no more power. It's like it's literally what we're taught with a bully in the playground.
Right.
If you give them power, they're going to keep bullying. If you unplug power, they will wither away. And yet that concept, that's when we get called Pollyanna, when we say unplug from the judgment and the drama, right? The greatest gift we can give ourselves is to stop watching the news. And I know for some people that's controversial. And there will be someone who will comment, are you saying you're going to bury your head in the sand? Yes and no. I'm saying that what we have decided is news is not news. It is a very, 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 and I'll say it a bunch of times, very small amount or percentage of the human experience. Love is happening more than hate. Connection is happening more than separation. The truth is we've been programmed to focus on that, and we've been programmed through generations. And it shows up in really absurd ways where, like, I heard that someone was killed by a shark, and the family went out and hunted down and killed the shark. Like, they think that's going to make them feel better, and it did not make them feel better. They succeeded in doing it. But that's the idea of, like, that shark is evil. No, that shark is a shark, right? And by the way, they're not really trying to run around eating people, but that's a different conversation, right? So the more we create enemies, the more we create the bad and the wrong and the judgment of that, the more power it has. So when we do our own healing or transformation and realize who and what we are, that becomes infectious in the world. And people will say, well, it can't be that simple. And here's my question. How has the other way been working? Mm-hmm. How has the other way been working when it's about good and bad and right and wrong? Mm-hmm. And I know everyone put the Ukrainian flag on their social, but do they even know what they're doing? Are they even aware of what's the layers of that? Mm-hmm. I think it's, I think of a certain political figure whose minister got in a lot of trouble because they said America needs to be accountable for the harm we've caused in the world. Now, that should be a really simple concept, but a lot of people pushed back about that.
Oh, America? How could America do that? Right? America is the chosen land, right? Right. Oh, it's amazing. Oh gosh, there's so many different places I'd like to go with you. These are, I go to these lectures at Unity and I sit there with my cell phone and I just notes, and I had a lot for you. I love this. You say that true science is living in the question, not in finding the answer.
Yeah.
Share with us about that.
Yeah. So I mean, science is intended to ask questions and look for the possible outcomes, right? And when you have a scientific theory, you have a theory that it's probably going to be this, and let's look at experimenting. But what we know now with quantum mechanics is that the very idea that we're looking for a particular outcome, there's a higher probability that we will discover it. So true science would be living in a question rather than looking for answers, right? And so, I use this as perhaps an overly simplistic example, but honestly, I think the most powerful. It was a scientific fact that the world was flat. Now, does that mean it was flat? Some people believe it is still, right? But that was the accepted fact of the time. And so we have all these ideas, and true science, this is why I love this, because a true scientist and a true spiritual practitioner are both living in the question, not looking for answers. Right. Because religion comes in and says we have the answers. Whereas to me, spirituality is an exploration of the infinite, right? That's why a lot of Native American cultures, the great mystery, right? The great unknown, right? We are looking at the infinite possibilities. So true science is, what if it's this? What if it's this? What if it's this? And then there's a discovery that comes through that openness. How many things have we discovered accidentally? We weren't even looking for it. Penicillin, right? That's one example. There's so many. I could give an example that's slightly off color, but I won't. Maybe once the cameras aren't rolling. But
okay.
Basically, the more we question, the more we're available for different answers and different possibilities. But when we think, I need to find the answer, and that's where we got in trouble with COVID, honestly. Everyone thought they had the answer and everyone was at odds with each other. And science is saying this, but 5 days later, the science discovered something new because that's what science is, right? It's not stagnant. And people got stuck on all of that. So yeah, I could talk for a whole other hour on that question.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the unknown. I want to talk about the unknown. We create from what we know because it's all we know, right? We create from what we know. If we want to bring in a partner into our lives and make a list of all the qualities we're looking for in the partner, and this is, I'm in a whole different place right now. I mean, I used to be the affirmation queen too, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Now I know I have my passion. I have my desires for what I want in my life, and now what I'm doing is I lift it up to a higher frequency. I just lift it up to a higher frequency and to the unknown, because I think it's in the unknown where the true juice lives, where the excitement is. It's the unknown. And if we're lifting it up to the unknown, we're not going down there. So it's not going to be something negative that we're creating by lifting it to the unknown. It's going to be something unknown and wonderful because we're lifting it up to a higher frequency. So I would think that this would be a very important piece of work for you with those in recovery, is to help them, move past what their history, definition, and collective agreement, as the guides call it, to the unknown. And that's where imagination comes into the picture, right? And they can imagine a life that is their greatest, whatever their greatest imagination is. I heard this quote, and I can't remember the fellow's name, but he said, imagination allows us to be there before we get there.
That's right.
Psycho-cybernetics.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you're saying is so powerful because, the idea that we create out of our mind or create what we want to, we decide what we want to create, right? That's visualization. And then we hold that and then we manifest that. And that's been powerful for many of us for decades, right? And that's really been an important part of our conscious evolution because we realize that we have the ability to create our lives. Where we're at now is, now that we've done that, right? Because that's the evolution of consciousness. We don't abandon all the wonderful parts of that level of consciousness. We take what works and we move to the next level. And the next level is being in the void. And what I mean by the void is the ultimate question. This is why I love Michael Beckwith's work around visioning, because visioning is being in the question. Visualization is deciding what I want. Very, very different things. And they both are effective in some way, but the visioning process, because when I first had the calling to do ministry or do spiritual work, and my life looked very different than that, my mind interpreted that as a very specific role. I wanted to be this role, and this is what I wanted. And that would have really limited me. Instead, I trusted vision, and vision kept coming up with these bigger things than I would have imagined, or these greater things. Like, I did not want to do work in recovery. It's not what I wanted to do. There were a lot of reasons I didn't want to. Spirit, vision, inner knowing kept saying yes, and I yielded to that. And then all these miraculous things or great things came from that because of my willingness to say yes to it.
The surrender experiment, yes. and Michael Singer, and he talks about, how he had things that would happen, or opportunities would be presented to him, and he didn't want to do it.
Right.
He didn't want to do it, but he made a commitment to surrender to every circumstance. And I don't know if you've ever read that book, but it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I love this quote too. I know we're going a little over time here. You don't mind?
I'm good for a little while longer. I mean, I have the energy to keep going forever. Then my calendar has other ideas, but I've got some time.
Well, we need to wrap it up soon. But I love you mentioned Krishnamurti. The highest form of human intelligence is a lack of self-judgment. A lack of self-judgment. Oh, I mean, I'm still working on that one a lot. I really am, especially as I'm aging, when I'm moving into old age. I'm going to be 79. So it's like, really? I mean, really?
Yeah.
So, Yeah, just moving past judgment, self-judgment. Share about that a little bit. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure that you have to bring this into your into your community and
Yeah.
into writing.
Yeah, that's the deepest work we can do, right? Is to see ourselves without judgment. And what I think Krishnamurti, I mean, I can't tell you what he meant by it, but what I hear through that is he says the highest form of human intelligence is to see ourselves without this judgment, right? It's to look at ourselves and question. For me, what I'll add to it is question every judgment, every belief, every idea. What if that's not who I am? What if who I really am is an infinite being? What if there are endless possibilities in every situation and I have the ability to choose and I'm choosing consciously or unconsciously? See, these are all questions that we can explore to be intelligent, right? And I love the way he uses that word because the bottom line is the way we've measured intelligence in our world looking back is through the intellect only. What can I memorize and regurgitate? And although that of course is intelligence, that's a small portion of it. The
Right.
ability to be infinite, to understand that we have choice, that we're choosing consciously or unconsciously, that we're an infinite being underneath all the conditions of the world, the programming from our families, from our communities, from kids on the playground. When we start to question all of that, and that's what I think, that's what I hear, see ourselves without judgment. Question those judgments, feel the energy of them, because we can go into like, I shouldn't judge myself, but that's such a judgment, right? Oh no, I'm judging myself for judging. Oh, that's a rabbit hole. Or yeah, I guess we can call it that. Or I can pause and say, oh, interesting. I noticed that I have a judgment about myself. What is that creating? Where did I first pick that up? Whose thought is that anyway? Is it my second grade teacher? Right? Who am I really? Then we shift. Who am I really? What am I capable of? What thought do I want to entertain in this moment? What would I like to create in my life at this moment? What if I absolutely knew I was an infinite being? What would that feel like? That's the way we start to work with these judgments. We don't try to get rid of them. We say, oh, I am much smarter than that now.
Well, what I do is I observe it. I observe the self-judgment and I say, okay, I'm lifting it up to a higher frequency. And
Yeah.
I'm lifting up my self-judgment, because I know that I'm a perfect being having this human experience of myself right now, judging myself. So
Yes.
I think as long as we're having the human experience and in this third dimensional reality, we're going to have opportunities to grow and learn. And it's an exciting time to be alive. It's exciting to be doing the work that we're doing. I'm, I've been fortunate in that in my life to always have done the work of service. I mean, that's just why I came, and to do the work that I love is such a joy, especially when I have clients that come and they're in, the golden handcuffs, the 9 to 5 job in the corporation, and then they're hating life. That's a real trap. But really, we are blessed with what the work that we're doing now.
Yeah. What a
So
gift, right? And we're the work that we do in consciousness has a profound effect on someone who we never meet.
exactly.
I remember when I wrote my first book, that's what I thought. Someone will read this after I'm not even in my body, and they'll have a spark of an awareness.
Yeah.
But that's happening for all of us. We don't have to write a book to do that. We simply
Right.
be that, right? Gandhi, be the change we want to see in the world.
Right.
Be that, be that, be that. And that frequency, it's not even a ripple effect, it's instantaneous. Somewhere across the world, someone felt this conversation. They might not even ever watch what we just talked about. That's how consciousness works. And we know with the 100th monkey, when we reach a certain threshold, it becomes the accepted norm. We're seeing that more and more and more. We're in a rapid acceleration of human consciousness right
It's
now.
exciting. And, I'll never forget Maharishi Mahesh Yogi before he died said that when 1/10 of 1%
Yeah,
of the population of humanity wakes up, then everyone will wake up. 1/10 of 1% of 8 billion people is not a lot of people. It's only 80 million people. Did you know
that's
that?
right.
80 million people is a drop in the bucket when you look at humanity. So it's an exciting and inspiring and uh, thrilling time to be in incarnation, to be in a body. No. So this was so much fun. I really enjoyed it. I hope that you'll come on again and we'll
I would,
continue the conversation.
I
Uh,
would.
so I'm going to ask you to close, I'm going to ask you for a pearl of wisdom.
Hmm.
What would you like to leave our listeners, our viewers with today? What pearl of wisdom?
You know, I often get asked a question similar to this. And so far, it seems like it's always the same message. And that is, if no one has told you yet today, you are a whole and perfect being, you are a spark of divinity. You came into the world as a perfect expression of the one power and the one presence. And it's your turn now to shine that and to be that in the world.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And I got that right. I got goosebumps. I got that right in every cell of my body when you said that. So thank you
Thank
for
you.
helping me to remember as well. This has been wonderful, TJ. Blessings on your work and this new program that's going to be coming out around your recovery work, Addiction Revealed. I'm sure this must be having effect with recovery programs all over the world.
That's definitely the intention. I'll be going to London in September to do a training with clinicians there and speak at a conference. So it's definitely a worldwide movement of what can get created as we have this subtle yet powerful shift from you're broken, I'm here to fix you. And the shift is to you're a whole and perfect being capable of healing and wholeness and transformation. And I'm here to facilitate that change with you. That's my mission on planet Earth. And
That
I'm
is
happy
so
to do it.
beautiful. And I got you right away when the first time I heard you speak. So I really acknowledge you and blessings on your work in the world. And let's do this again sometime
Yes,
soon.
absolutely. Anytime.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all for listening and for viewing this podcast with TJ Woodward. He's an amazing fellow, and I encourage you to get his books, which I mentioned in the introduction, and take to heart what we shared today. We're divine, align with the divine being that you are. Until the next time, bye bye. Thanks for joining me today on Align with the Divine podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show. And if you'd like to learn more about my work, I invite you to my website, alignwiththedivine.net. And on the homepage, I'm giving away a free gift. It's a masterclass I did called The 7 Keys to Successful Manifesting. Pretty much lays out the bones of my work. Also, for a limited time only, between now and the end of August, just for the summer, I'll be giving complimentary tarot sessions, 30-minute sessions valued at $90. So if you're interested, reach out to me using my email, patricia@patriciadiorio.com, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks again for joining me today, and namaste.